Hello and welcome to a video that I guess I wouldn't necessarily call is very special one, but is at least a halfway special one because it's episode 200 of the Book Binge, and also because we're coming right up on the verge of my third anniversary here doing booktube stuff. So I thought I'd do something mildly special as a result. Now this isn't necessarily as special the way that my 100th episode of the Book Binge was, where I reviewed or basically rewatched and reacted to a couple of my early Book Binge videos. This time I'm doing something, like I said, it's sort of special, something that's a little bit different, but something that I thought would still be fun for the rest of you guys and not just for me. Today, we're going to be ranking my Goodreads Favorites Shelf. So, basically what this is that on my Goodreads account, which is actually linked in my YouTube channel page if you want to go check that out, is about 40 books large or so. So I don't really want to waste too much time at the beginning of this one explaining what I'm doing. It's not that complicated. I decided to make this a tier list for simplicity's sake, where there's a few different ranks of where I'm going to put some of the books that I've considered to be my favorites since I started doing booktube, or rather just a few months before I started doing booktube, when I started reading again in late 2021. So let's just jump over to my desktop here, where I have my list of books to talk about for the tier list. What I want to do at the start of this list, however, is not just start ranking basically what I've read. I want to rank a few books that I feel like could be on this list, or to some degree maybe even should be on this list, a handful of them, but that aren't quite on there yet. That's what this bottom tier is. Didn't quite make the list. And also, to explain a little bit further for this one, these aren't ranked in the sense of like, oh, this is my favorite of these books and this is my least favorite of these books, but rather putting them between different categories, as you see over here. Certified bangers, so like the ones that I think are top tier, top quality, and not just my favorites, things that I think everybody should read or everybody would love, or rather most people. And if you want more details on any of them, you can watch the reviews for these individual books, because I've reviewed in some capacity basically everything on here. 4 out of 5 star masterpieces, which are books that I really love, that I really connected with, that I think are really special for one reason or another, but have something holding it back that basically make it really difficult, if not impossible, to recommend to people. Non-banger favorites, which are just favorite books of mine that I don't necessarily think are upper echelon, top tier, like this is the best book that's ever been written type of thing. So things that are like nostalgia favorites, or things that I really enjoy, but for reasons that I couldn't necessarily define, or whatever the case may be, might come off the list. That is spelt wrong, so I'll go ahead and fix that. Might come off the list is pretty self-explanatory. Books that I have on my favorites shelf from the last 3 years of doing the booktube thing, but that may or may not still qualify for that. That, like, if I were to come back to this later, or if I were to think about it later down the line, might come off just because I don't think they're truly a favorite of mine. So that's what that is for. But like I said, I do want to start off with the 5 books that I'm going to put in didn't quite make the list, because I feel like to some degree they're kind of deserving to be there, but to some degree kind of not. Now, the first one is going to be Stephen King's The Long Walk, which is a favorite book of mine when I first read it back in 2020 in high school. Really special book that I reread recently and didn't quite love the ending quite enough to still put it here, but there's something about this that still tells me like maybe it should be on my favorites shelf, because I still think of it as one of King's best books, even though I haven't read a lot of King up to this point. So it's not on the list yet, but it could be. East of Eden is another example of a really fantastic book, and one that really connected with me. In fact, one of the things that still sticks with me the most is the fact that John Steinbeck took caricatures of what he wanted people to be like, but was able to make them human in spite of that, and that really produced a fantastic writing quality for the characters. This one probably should be on my favorites shelf, but I just haven't put it on there quite yet. Anna Karenina is basically the exact same thing. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on these 2 books and how the character versus caricature aspect aligns, watch my reviews for each of them, and I explain a little bit more on that. Anna Karenina is a very good book, and I think maybe should be on this list, but again, I haven't decided. The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite books by McCarthy, out of the solid handful that I did enjoy quite a bit, but there's aspects of it that didn't really hit or maybe were a little bit too long, and so it's hard to put on the favorites shelf. But basically, every time I think of this one, I'm like, I should probably put that on my Goodreads favorite shelf, but I'm not sure. I think at some point in the future, I'm going to come back and reread the Border trilogy as a whole, because I think I'll enjoy all three of the books even more the second time around. And in that case, I think The Crossing will end up on my favorites shelf if I do that. Infinite Jest is the final one of these books that didn't quite make the list, one that I'm still in the process of reviewing, writing my review for it, and one that even if I had finished reading it and it was going to be on this list, it would be in the 4 out of 5 star masterpieces somewhere, because Infinite Jest has some of the best things I've ever read in fiction, but it also really knows how to shoot itself in the foot sometimes and really holds itself back. So it definitely, there's really an argument to be made for Infinite Jest being on my favorites shelf. I just haven't put it there quite yet. But the rest of these books, these 38 remaining books on the list, are on my favorites shelf, and we'll talk about them now, more or less in the order that I read them, or at least the order that I've most recently read them. So let's jump into it. The Wrath of Darth Maul is one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It remains to be a favorite. It's very short, sort of middle grade YA book about Darth Maul. One that I think is a little bit too short. One that I obviously wanted to be a bit longer. And one of the first books that I reviewed on this channel. I think The Wrath of Darth Maul is a fantastic book, not just a fantastic Star Wars book, but if you like Maul as a character, or even Darth Sidious as a character, and you want a little bit of backstory that kind of expands Maul in general, like, this book is going to hit for you, and it hits for me as well. I'm going to put this in non-banger favorites because I don't necessarily think it's a must-read for everybody, or it's not like a literary masterpiece, but it is absolutely one of my favorites, and I do not regret putting it on this list at all. The Hobbit was a book that I first read basically the entirety of back in 6th grade, and was one of the first books that I read, obviously coming back to reading in late 2021, and really connected with me. The sort of not fairy tale, the bedtime story aspect of it, to the prose and the way that characters speak to one another, the interactions of the characters with the world, is just something really special with The Hobbit. I genuinely think this is a certified banger, and really just one of the most special fantasy books there is. One of the ones that made me realize that, yeah, maybe fantasy is for me. And what definitely confirmed that was reading Fellowship of the Ring the next month, which is a certified banger even above The Hobbit. For sure, Lord of the Rings is not overrated to basically any degree. If there is moments of it that are overrated, none of those moments, in my opinion, are in the Fellowship of the Ring. Something about this just really works for me. Really, truly, deep down, it just does, and I love it. The Shining by Stephen King was one that really surprised me. I actually went into this one very skeptical if it could be as good as people say it is. Not just because I had read Carrie and Salem's Lot, and Salem's Lot is one of the most popular King books, and I really liked Salem's Lot, but it wasn't like, it didn't grip me to the degree that I would say it's one of my favorites. The Shining absolutely did, especially my skepticism going into it. I was like, this can't be that good, and it ended up being that good. It was phenomenal, and like, I think this one is even a certified banger. Like, if you like King to any degree, The Shining is almost certainly going to be a book that you really enjoy, because it's just distilled early era King at his finest, and is very good, much better than the movie, and also does a lot of foreshadowing, which is not necessarily something that King is fantastic at. So it just really stuck out as a banger to me at the time. So this should probably be in non-banger favorites up here. And I'll go ahead and keep it there, but part of me wants to put it in certified bangers, because, like, I still love this book even after a few years. I don't think that that's ever going to disappear. Next up is Return of the King, which is technically my favorite of the Lord of the Rings trilogy books, solely because, well, it's just fantastic. Like, what more can I say about it? If you haven't read Lord of the Rings and don't know how special it is, I feel sorry for you, but Lord of the Rings is something truly special. And while The Two Towers was not my favorite thing, Return of the King was one of my favorite books of the year in 2023 because I read that, or sorry, 2022, because I read it in January of 2022, whereas Fellowship of the Ring would have been basically my book of the year 2021. I don't remember how exactly I ranked those 10 books when I did that back then. But these two are just special, and the fact that Tolkien makes up the 3 certified bangers so far in the list is kind of no surprise to me. But yeah, Lord of the Rings is just special. I don't really have anything else to say about it. Next, we come up to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is, oh, it's so special. It is one of my favorite books to this day, and I think is actually a certified banger that I'm probably going to put above The Hobbit even. It's the book that got me more interested in literary fiction and classics because it was the first book as part of a monthly classics read-along thing that I was doing for a very long time. Frankenstein was the first one of those. It's one of the first books that made me just like argue with myself about why it was as special to me as it was, and it became a sort of video essay on my channel. Not a great video, but one that I was attempting to do something different, one that I wanted to do a similar style of for all of the classics that I read because of how good it was. So I think it's worthy of being up in certified bangers. The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan is the 5th book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, and is the best book of that series. Riordan is a foundational author for me, even though I think he's genuinely a lot, like, very good as far as middle grade and YA stuff goes. He's still very high quality. I'm gonna go ahead and put The Last Olympian in non-banger favorites because, well, that's just where it is. I don't think it's like one of the most special things in the world, but if you have a kid looking to get into fantasy or fantasy-esque type of stuff, not just Harry Potter is good, but like Percy Jackson and the Olympians is like what I would recommend for younger readers to get into a sort of fantasy type of thing. Next up are a couple of my favorite Dark Tower books by Stephen King, and Dark Tower is a very good series and one that I'm glad I read when I did. Because if I were to read it at some point later, I'm not sure how well it would work for me. I like King a lot, but now that I'm reading a lot more like classic and traditional fantasy or normal epic fantasy type stuff, those zaniness that the Dark Tower can be, who knows how well that would have actually sat with me if I were to read it at a different point in time. But Wizard and Glass, book 4 in the series, is mostly a favorite of mine because of the flashback. If you know anything about this book, you know that parts 2 and 3, so like 75% of the book or something like that, are just a flashback. And that flashback story is incredible. It is one of my favorite pieces of fiction to this day. And frankly, I related to it a little bit too hard. It just smacked me right in the gut, and I think it is super worthy of being a favorite, so I'm going to go ahead and keep it on the list here, right at non-banger favorites, just under The Shining, because I think The Shining is a better book, because I don't love part 1 of Wizard and Glass, because it's just finishing off what should have been In the Wastelands, the book prior, and part 4 didn't really do anything for me, but that middle part is just phenomenal. The Dark Tower 7, the title book of the series, is just really special. I know a lot of people have criticisms of this one, and I understand why they have criticisms of it, but something about it just works really well for me. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one at non-banger favorites as well, but probably, well, let's go ahead and put that here, just under The Shining, because again, I think The Shining is probably a better book than The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower and The Shining are probably my 2 favorite Stephen King books up to this point, however, so they're worthy of being up at that point. So, you know, next up we come to a very, very long classic, War and Peace, which is probably the easiest classic or literary fiction book that like epic fantasy fans could get into. It really is that good. But something about it just doesn't hook me, even though I really liked it, and I even liked Epilogue Part 2 a lot, whereas a lot of people think the book's a masterpiece except for Epilogue Part 2. I really liked everything about it, but whenever I think about this one and remember that it's on my favorites shelf, I sometimes wonder why. Like, it is really, really good, but something about me wonders if someday I might take it off the favorites shelf. I'm not 100% sure about that yet, obviously, but there may come a day where I decide that this one isn't the favorite, and maybe Anna Karenina will end up on the favorite. So that's kind of the irony between those two. Between the two, I don't know which one I prefer. I think War and Peace is going to be the one that more people like, especially in the fantasy readership. But Anna Karenina connected with me War and Peace connected with me. Both of them are really good, but War and Peace might come off the favorites shelf at some point in time. The Emperor's Sword by Andrew Clavin is the third book in the Another Kingdom trilogy, which was basically my introduction to doing audiobooks, like my first true introduction to doing traditional audiobooks. And I thought it was pretty good. And The Emperor's Sword especially was really great, had some really groundbreaking stuff in it. In fact, one of the scenes in it still sticks in my mind to this day as being one of the coolest moments that I've experienced. Due in no small part to the audio narration. Michael Knowles did a really, really good job with the narration of this trilogy. But I think The Emperor's Sword is mostly in the favorites list because of stuff like, you know, the fact that it was one of my first audiobooks and it really hit me and it worked really well and I enjoyed it a lot. But there may come a point where I decide to take it off the favorites shelf because I'm not sure if it's really quite good enough to be amongst, you know, its peers that are currently on the list. Sort of a similar thing for The Serpent's Shadow. The Serpent's Shadow is my favorite book in the Kane Chronicles trilogy, and it is quite good. There are some issues with it, but as a climactic story for the trilogy, I think it is fantastic. But even by Riordan Saturn's, it's not quite as memorable to me as The Last Olympian or some of his other books that I would consider favorites. So even though I think this one is perfectly fine and would be put on non-banger favorites, I do also think there might come a time where I decide to take this one off the list because King Chronicles just isn't quite at the level of some of Riordan's other work. But next up, we come to one of the greatest pieces of writing ever from Homer, the Iliad, just one that absolutely blew me away. This being an epic poetry story. It's the Trojan War, you know? Even though the Iliad doesn't actually have the Trojan horse scene in it, which a lot of people think it does, it doesn't actually. The Iliad really surprised me. It is truly fantastic. It was one of my favorites, if not my favorite book of 2022 when I did that ranking of it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it up here and put it in certified bangers. And I think it might go at the top because, yeah, Homer really cracked the code with this one. Like, there's a reason this story has persisted for centuries, millennia even. It is very, very good. And I think it is absolutely worth all of the praise that it gets, despite a couple moments, like one specific book in it, one specific chapter, I guess, if you want to call it that, which is a little bit unnecessary because it just lists a bunch of names that people at the time might have known about and would have been like, oh yeah, cool, I'm glad to hear these names, but that like don't mean anything to a modern audience, so it feels kind of mediocre. And there are also plenty of portions within it that get a little bit repetitive, where it feels a little bit samey and repetitive, the way that a song kind of is, because it was originally sung in the Greek. But overall, like, the very few downsides of the Iliad aren't worth putting it down any lower than I currently have it. It is incredible. American Psycho, however, is going to be the first book that we put in 4 out of 5-star masterpieces because this is an incredible book. I loved American Psycho, but do I recommend it to people broad scale? Absolutely not, because I think you're really going to have to know where your taste is, and the types of things that you're going to appreciate to be able to connect with it. Because if you don't connect with it, you're going to find it super tedious and super boring, maybe even way too graphic for you, depending on where your levels of, appreciation for that kind of thing are. And yeah, like it is a lot. American Psycho is a lot. And the truth is that, like, the criticisms against it aren't unfounded. It is pretty tedious. It is pretty boring. And when it is graphic, it is pretty graphic, maybe even to a degree that is kind of unnecessary. But even despite all of that stuff, something about the tone and the narration of it and being stuck in Patrick Bateman's head just clicked. And I love this book. It is amazing. But it's a 4 out of 5-star masterpiece because I just cannot give it 5 stars. And again, like I said, I cannot really recommend it broad scale. You kind of have to know what you're getting into, and also be really interested in that. If you've seen the movie and you love the movie, you're halfway to enjoying the book because the tone of them are surprisingly similar, and that movie is shockingly faithful to the book. But the book is a lot more tedious and boring because there's a lot more words there being stuck in Bateman's head that could be considered to some degree fluff, even though they really sell the tone in a way. But yeah, it's a lot. It is a hard book to appreciate, but I really appreciated it, so that goes there. Next up, we're returning to Homer, which is the Odyssey, basically the quote unquote sequel of sorts to the Iliad following Odysseus' journey home. And depending on who you are, you're going to have a preference for one or the other. Whether Iliad's going to be your favorite of the two or the Odyssey doesn't really matter to me because they're both incredible, both worthy of being in those spots. And it's really hard to say which one I quote unquote prefer. If you want me to tell you which one I think is the just more impressive body of work, I think the Iliad is probably a little bit more impressive, or at the very least it surprised me a little bit more. I was thinking like I'll probably like this, but I'm not sure how much I'll love it, and then I really ended up loving. I anticipated that I would love the Odyssey as much as I did, so it didn't have that kind of shock or surprise factor to it. But I think if you enjoy more of a traditional narrative, the Odyssey is definitely going to hit a little bit harder for you. The Iliad's going to hit a little bit harder if maybe you're too familiar with the Odyssey. I've heard of people who way too familiar with the sort of tropes and the way that the Odyssey unfolds, so that when they read it, it maybe isn't as impressive to them. And I could see that as well. And frankly, these two are interchangeable for me. Like they're both at the top here. I think they're just brilliant bodies of work. Again, they withstood the test of time for a reason. Between my preference, I think I probably like the Odyssey better, but I find the Iliad slightly more impressive. So I'm going to put the Iliad above, but just know that these two are interchangeable. It doesn't really make a difference which one is where. But next up, we come to the book that I spent the entirety of November 2022 reading, literally from the first day through to the last day, reading for 2 to 5 hours every single day until I finished it, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which is one of my favorite books. Like, this is probably tied for my favorite book of all time. It really impacted me emotionally, even the tangents and stuff like that. The criticisms of this one aren't entirely unfounded. The tangents are quite a bit. I understand why some people don't really like it very much. I have several friends who really enjoyed the first couple of books, but then as it got on, stopped liking it as much, or especially with a couple of specific characters. But the entirety of this thing is just perfect in my mind. And even though it's hard to say that it is, because there's obviously some problems with it, such as the tangents being a huge hurdle to get over, none of them affected me to any significant degree. I just loved this thing to pieces. I'm going to go ahead and put it at certified banger because I do think it is like one of the best books ever written, even though I totally understand why people bounce off of it or why the criticisms of it exist. If you were to cut out the tangents of it, and only the tangents of it, by the way, because any abridgments of this book are way shorter, way shorter than even just cutting out the tangents. But like if you only cut out the tangents, you would have what I think is indisputably an imperfect or a perfect book. That's how much I love it. It's just where on the certified bangers list can I put it? I'm going to go ahead and put it above Frankenstein because I do think it is a notably better book than Frankenstein. I'm going to put it below Lord of the Rings though. No real justification for that. It's just one of my favorites, and I do think it deserves to have withstood the test of time, and I do think it is something really special, despite the amount of people who would disagree with me on that front. Next up, we have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which even though I gave this 5 stars, I should probably adjust it. I'm going to go ahead and put this in 4 out of 5 star masterpiece. Now, the reason for that is I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, especially this translation of it that this cover is. I forget the name of the translator and I can't see it zoomed in the way that I am in here. But this book is really, really good, really special to me. It's one that I really connected with when I read the first half of it back in like 8th grade or something like that, and then finally returned to it a few years ago for the monthly classics. But it does have some things that I understand why people wouldn't really connect to it. The struggles that certain people in the read along had with it, such as like really, really specific material about like biology of certain creatures in the sea that are a little bit tedious to get through, a little bit difficult to get through. There are moments of it when it does feel a tiny bit bloated, even though it really isn't that long in the first place. But like, if you're sold on the tone of it and you really enjoy the main character of it, like I do, you're going to enjoy the book and find a lot to appreciate about it. It is definitely one of my favorite books. But I can totally see why there's a part of me that would think like, oh, maybe this should come off the list, but it is one of my favorites. It's one that holds a place in my heart for reasons that I have a hard time really explaining why. So I'm going to put in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces for that reason. And I do think at some point I will probably adjust my score and review on Goodreads to reflect that, to actually be a 4 out of 5 instead of 5 out of 5, because I yeah, I don't need to explain anymore. That's just where I'm going to put it for this list. Next up, we come to Ashes of Man by Christopher Rocchio, and rather, I guess I'm going to go ahead and take Howling Dark out from up here and put it ahead of it, because Howling Dark was a little bit further in the list because of when I reread it. But Howling Dark and Ashes of Man are both really special books to me. Sun Eater is my favorite series, so there's a little bit in there that's kind of influenced by a little bit of bias, especially since, there's some degree to which I work with Rocchio as well. In fact, a later entry on this list, which we'll talk about, I actually copy edited for him. So there is a little bit of a biased nature in there. But like Howling Dark was a special book for me because I enjoyed Empire of Silence quite a bit, was very impressed by it when I read it. But Howling Dark really, really shocked me. I do think it is a super special book, a really, really good book. And I do think that Sun Eater will probably end up being one of the greats of science fiction, and especially of like science fantasy, if you want to, get real technical about it. Where to put this on the list is the part that is really hard, because there's the degree to which I think Sun Eater maybe should be in non-banger favorite. And maybe that's because my bias is like overcompensating and I want to say maybe I should put it in non-banger because otherwise I'm just going to put it in certified banger. But I think Howling Dark is a certified banger. If Sun Eater is going to be something that is for you, Howling Dark will really prove that for you. In fact, I think most people who have read the series, at least most people who love the series, would put Demon in White wherever it is that I'm putting Howling Dark in the certified bangers. It's just a matter of where would I put it. I'm not quite sure. I'm going to go ahead and put it just below Tolkien. I think Rocchio would be offended a bit if he was put above Tolkien for any reason. He's above Hugo, below Homer, below Tolkien. I think that's a good place to put him for Howling Dark. And Ashes of Man, I'm going to basically do the same thing, but I'm going to put it just above. These two are basically tied for my favorite book in the series, but like Sun Eater is incredible. I love it. I do think it is one of the best things in sci-fi, one of the best ongoing series going right now. Shadows Upon Time is probably my most anticipated book of the decade at this point, which is coming out in 2025. Almost certainly in 2025 anyway. I'm going to put in certified bangers, even though part of me wants to overcompensate and down it to non-banger favorites. But yeah, maybe I should actually adjust this list. I'm partway through the list already, so I'm sorry to do this, but I'm actually going to go ahead and edit the order of the list here so that 4 out of 5 star masterpieces is the middle one. Whoops, that needed to be the lighter orange like that. There we go. So that, there's a little bit better balancing in here, and because 4 out of 5 star masterpieces sounds like more of a snub than I think I mean it to be. Whereas non-banger favorites are still books that I rated for 5 out of 5, or books that I think are fully worthy of being here, if for my tastes alone. Whereas 4 out of 5 star masterpieces are things that are like, yeah, I think that people who read this and love it will agree with me it being a favorite, but maybe not necessarily like the certified bangers, like almost anybody who reads this is going to love it type of thing, which is kind of ironic because, yeah, Les Mis is maybe more of a contender for non-banger favorite that way, but I do think it is a banger. So whatever, it doesn't really matter. Next up, we're going to put Count of Monte Cristo on the list, which is another very chonky classic and one that I enjoyed quite a bit, but one that I think didn't quite work for me quite as well as it did most other people. I think the first 300 pages of this novel, or at least 300 pages of this specific Penguin edition that the cover is on the screen for, is in fact perfect. The first 300 pages is probably one of the best things that I've ever read, but most of the rest of the novel after that is really good, but not quite as special, not as memorably special, at least. So for that reason, I'm actually going to put this in non-banger favorite, and a lot of people are probably going to be super mad at me about that. Like, Count of Monte Cristo is a certified banger, but for whatever reason, outside of those first 300 pages, I never think back on this one, and it being on my favorites shelf is like, yeah, that one definitely deserves to be on my favorites shelf. There's a little bit of me that almost wonders if it should come off, even though that I know it shouldn't. I feel like Les Mis and Count of Monte Cristo could both be like in their own individual tier in between certified banger and non-banger favorites, where like it kind of depends on where it hits for you. But I feel like most people love Count of Monte Cristo, uh, maybe a little bit more than Les Mis. So like by technicality's sake, these two should probably be switched spots. Um, but this is my list, so I have it where I want to put them. 127 Hours by Aaron Ralston is one of my favorite autobiographies and one that I really hold in high regard. It is one of my favorite books for sure, but it's kind of hard to say why for sure. This is also one that I rated 5 out of 5, but I wonder if it should be in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces. But like, it's not even really a masterpiece in that way. It's not like it has something really going for it that makes it special, that makes it a certified banger, but that also makes it hard to recommend. I'm gonna go ahead and put this at the bottom of non-banger favorites, because while I do really love this book, there's nothing like super stand out about it to such a degree that I think it requires to be put anywhere else, because I don't think I would necessarily consider to take this off the list. Maybe I might take it off the list, but I also would be kind of surprised if I felt inclined to do that. So that's where it's going to go. And kind of a similar situation for The Card Turner by Louis Satcher, which I'm going to go ahead and put like pretty high up here, actually. One of my favorite books of all time. I'll go ahead and put it in between the two Dark Tower books. The Card Turner is one of my all-time favorites, and like the reasons why are actually kind of hard to specify. I really adore this book. Not necessarily one that I think every single person should read, because who necessarily wants to read a book about the card game Bridge, but something about it really works for me. I love it. It's not like a certified banger that I think everybody should give a shot or everybody should read, but it is one that I adore nonetheless. Gregor and the Code of Claw is also going to go in non-banger favorites, because it is one of my favorite books and one of my favorite series, and is a lot better than I think I usually give it credit for, like in memory. When I reread The Underland Chronicles by Susan Collins, like the first few books are like good, they're solid books. But 4 and 5, especially when you combine them together, are like something really special, and in fact maybe even aged a little bit too high for the intended audience. These are more YA books than they are middle grade books, even though they're obviously structured and formatted in the publishing means a little bit more for a middle grade audience. But like I think Code of Claw is special. It is really good. The end still got me really emotional upon the reread, so it is a favorite. It's just not like a certified banger. So that's where that's going to go. The Dragon Reborn is another one that's a little bit harder to rank, because I really like The Wheel of Time, but not everybody does. And my favorite books in the series and my least favorite books in the series are basically the opposite of everybody else. But that's okay. The Dragon Reborn, I really, really, really adored. Hard to say exactly why that is the case, but I did really adore it. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the bottom of certified bangers, because I do think it is a really great book that I have like a very hard time pointing out super substantial flaws for. But obviously the Wheel of Time is not for everybody. It's just, I'm going to put it there because I feel like I can, because I want to. Next up is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones, an author that I have a love-hate relationship with, because I enjoy a few of his stories and really don't enjoy some of the other ones. But Night of the Mannequins is one of the better ones. I'm putting this in 4 out of 5 star masterpiece, one that I actually snubbed when I initially rated and reviewed it for the channel, because when I initially reviewed it, or at least reviewed it on Goodreads, I only had it at 3 out of 5 stars and was just like, man, I really wasn't sure if I'm into the direction that this was going. But like, the more that I think about this book, and it's remained the case ever since I read it, the more that I think about Night of the Mannequins, the more I think it is great, and the more that I appreciate what it was that Jones was doing with it. And it quickly became one of my favorite books, like in memory. A few months after after reading this one, I looked through my read shelf on Goodreads and saw it was there and was like, is this in my favorites? And it wasn't in my favorites. I was like, I need to fix that. Then I realized the rating was still 3 out of 5. I was like, you know what, I need to re-rate and re-review this immediately, because yeah, this one is actually one of my favorites, even though I didn't quite realize it at the time that I read it. So absolutely a 4 out of 5 star masterpiece, not one that I think I would or should recommend to very many people, but for those who clicks for, like me and Murphy Napier, for example, Night of the Mannequins is incredible. Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3 is also kind of a weird one to put on here. This is the aforementioned title that I copy edited. This is one that I'm actually going to put down here and might come off the list. I'll probably put it at the very bottom, we'll say. And part of the reason, in fact, why I would say it might come off the list is really the only reason I justified putting it on my favorite shelf in the first place, even though I try to only do like one, maximum two books per series if it's a really long series, or if it's a lengthier series on my favorites shelf, because otherwise certain series I would put all of them on there, hence why like the Two Towers isn't in here, and why some of the other Sun Eater or maybe Wheel of Time books aren't in here. I have to restrict myself to some degree, of course. In Tales of the Sun Eater, I justified because it's a short story collection and not like a proper novel in the series. It's one of my favorite short story collections ever. I think that Volume 3 is an absolute banger, but I also don't exactly know why I still keep it on my favorites shelf, because to some degree it maybe shouldn't be on there. Next up is At Night All Blood is Black, which is a pretty hard book to recommend to people, and why I'm going to put it in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces. One that I really enjoyed and which was really fun to try to interpret. In fact, a few months before I even reviewed the book, I did a reading diary of the book more or less immediately upon finishing it, just like, let's talk about what I think the ending is about, and I like tried to interpret it to some degree. Maybe I did a bad job of that, maybe I did an okay job of it, I don't know. If you want to check that out, you can. But it's a book that I really enjoyed, and that I think is deserving of the awards that it's gotten, but is also kind of hard to recommend and has some stuff about it that are a little bit more trigger warning-y, harder to really say it's a certified banger, but it's like very close to being a certified banger for me. There's aspects to the confusion of it that are perhaps just a tiny bit too much, though. Return to Adan is one of my favorite books of 2023. I believe it was my number 2, maybe my number 3 book of the year. I absolutely loved it. I think the Adan trilogy is quite good and quite worthy of existing. I think Philip did a fantastic job with it, and Return to Adan is a prime example of that. I'm going to put this, like, I think at the top of non-banger favorites, because while I'm not entirely sure, well, no, this is going to go in certified banger. I think Return to Adan is a certified banger, if for no other reason than because of the way that it handles the topic of trilogies. I talk about this in my reviews of the trilogy as a whole, but especially Prophet of Adan and Return to Adan. Philip doesn't do the typical trilogy structure where you would expect the typical fantasy trilogy at this point to go. Philip has that happen in book 2, and therefore book 3 is covering an entirely separate resolution style arc and goes different places, allows for a little bit more time to breathe in that regard. And what he does with Return, especially incorporating a new character in there that is really impactful. I think the way that he handled certain religious sort of themes in there is very special compared to a lot of fantasy author these days. It really impacted me emotionally. Like, I believe I cried at the end of it, and if I didn't, I was like right on the verge of it. I think I might have, however. I don't remember for sure. I probably specified in my review whether I did. The end of it was very emotionally impactful, and one of those things where, like, I know how this is going to end coming up on the last couple of chapters. Like, I know where this is going. I know how this is going to end. I don't want that to happen, but I know it has to, because there's no other option, and it is great. It is fantastic. I loved Return to Adan. It is one of my favorites. I decided to put it on certified bangers because I put The Dragon Reborn here, and I think Return to Adan is probably a little bit better of a book than The Dragon Reborn is, no matter how much I enjoyed The Dragon Reborn. Next up is going to be yet another 4 out of 5 star masterpiece. I've read plenty of those this year. That's kind of funny. 4 out of 5 star masterpiece is going to be The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. And in fact, when did I review this one? Which episode of the Book Binge is this one? Is this the next episode of the Book Binge? I gotta double check on that real quick. Yeah, I was right. So literally this coming Sunday, my review for The Crying of Lot 49 will be coming out. And if you watch that review, you will understand why I'm putting this in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces. Because that kind of seems like the kind of terrain that Pynchon is just kind of gonna hold for me in general as an author. But Crying of Lot 49 was one that really worked for me, really clicked for me back in February of this year, 2024, when I read it, that I really enjoyed a ton. But there are some things holding it back, not least the fact that it doesn't really have an ending, even though the ending is a lot of why the satirical mystery aspects of it work. Like, there's a lot about this book to talk about. That's why the review is coming out, and why I think you should check out the review when it does come out. Where this goes on the list, though, is a lot harder to figure out because, like, man, it's a really, really good book, but I know it's kind of a struggle too. But like, I don't remember basically anything about this thing not fondly. It's one that I really desperately want to reread at some point because I think I'll like it even more on the reread. So I think I'm going to put it above Night of the Mannequins. I think this and Night of the Mannequins are both books that I'm going to look back on with more fondness over time, even as years continue to pass. And that's probably going to be the way of it. Whereas like a night, At Night, All Blood is Black, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea are books that I like very slight bit less, I think of less fondly over time. Not that I like them any less, but that they're not like as special in my heart anymore. The way that these two continue to be like, yeah, that is a favorite book type of thing. Fires of Heaven, instead of putting in certified bangers, I'm going to put at the top of non-bangers and kind of have these be sort of counter to each other, because like I think Dragon Reborn and Fires of Heaven are tied with each other. In fact, I'm actually just going to go ahead and put Dragon Reborn in non-banger favorites because that's probably a better place for it. I really enjoyed The Wheel of Time up to this point, and these two books are my favorite books in it, and really exemplified the things that I do enjoy. When Robert Jordan is at his best, he is really, really, really good, even though when he's at his worst, it can be a little bit annoying to try to slog through certain sections. Of course, I haven't even read the books that are considered to be the quote-unquote slog yet, so who knows? I might just be talking out my ass right now, but that is okay. These two books I just really enjoy. I'm going to go ahead and actually stick them here and keep them here in non-banger favorites, because I think that's a little bit more appropriate for Wheel of Time, whereas like Return to Adan is a little bit more like special in a way that Wheel of Time so far has not quite managed to be. Still really enjoy Wheel of Time, but again, kind of for that reason that I was giving when I talked about Dragon Reborn earlier, Wheel of Time is really not for some people, and that's okay. Goodbye Eri is not quite a book, it is a manga, but it is a very good manga, and one that, again, kind of like a couple other things here, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, even though I rated it 5 out of 5, I'm putting it in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces, because a lot of the reason, come on, there we go. A lot of the reason why I rated it 5 out of 5 was because it managed to make me cry like twice, maybe even a third time, over the course of just 200 manga pages, or maybe 300 manga pages. I forget. It's really short, really quick. It has some really weird stuff about it. Like there's certain decisions in it that I'm just like, what in the world are you even doing? This is weird. But the emotional side of it is so special. And like I said, it made me cry at least a couple of times because it is so special. And that was knowing a lot of what happens in the manga ahead of time. Like it's not even like I went in blind. Like I knew what this manga was doing, and it still made me cry. So there's something very special about that, but there's some very weird decisions in there, some things that are very kind of strange and that like should have really put me off, and to some degree kind of did, that like, decisions that I personally would have done very differently, but even despite that are thematically relevant in a way that is interesting and dynamic and fun. So it's just one of those things that's it's good. It's very good. It is special, but something about it is just like, I don't know if that's like a certified banger. But it is definitely a favorite, and I'll go ahead and keep it there in the 4 out of 5 star. Again, even though I rated it 5 stars. Next up, we're actually going to skip this option for the moment and talk about The Blood of Olympus by Rick Riordan instead. And I'm going to go ahead and just put this in non-banger favorites. Kind of the stuff that I said about Riordan earlier with The Last Olympian kind of applies here with The Blood of Olympus, but The Blood of Olympus is really special in my mind. It is my favorite of the Heroes of Olympus, which is itself kind of a hot take. And something that I think will continue to be fondly remembered by me in perpetuity, because my hardcover of it on the shelf back here is a first edition day one hardcover, and I think it's probably the first book that I personally owned that was a first edition like day one thing. So for that reason, it kind of holds special place in my heart. Like I actually started reading this, I believe 1 or 2 days, even maybe even 3 days. I don't remember, but at least a couple of days before it technically released, because I was able to get it delivered to me before release, and it was like as a teenager, that was really special to be able to read like the final book in like my favorite series at the time by my favorite author, the one that made me want to write. That was really special to me. So like for non-banger favorite, man, I think this one deserves to go at the top of a non-banger favorite. There's something about this that just works, decisions about it that are surprising yet satisfying. I like the climax quite a bit. It holds a lot of fond memories. So for nostalgia reasons, I think this one goes pretty high up in non-banger favorites, but that I think it's okay for that to be the case. I'll just leave that there and not question myself anymore. The reason I skipped the last option, however, is because these next two items on the tier list are Cormac McCarthy's Western Family duology, so The Passenger and Stella Maris. If you want to know what I thought about these a little bit more in depth before I gush about these for about 15 years, watch the hour-long review that I did for them, even though there are spoiler sections in there. I think about half hour, 25 minutes or so of that review is totally spoiler-free, though, so you can get a good idea of what I thought about these without even watching the spoiler sections. But something about these really clicked, even where like McCarthy as a whole in general doesn't often click for me. In fact, often doesn't click for me. The Passenger felt like a combination, a coalescence, yet a better version of several of McCarthy's past work. It's like he took everything that he had written prior and combined it into certain ideas that he was now studying at the Santa Fe Institute. The sort of quantum themes, the scientific ideas that are going on in here, the familial themes that are going on in here, the love and family related things. I just said familial, so that's redundant, but that's okay. Like, just everything about this duology really worked for me. The Passenger is easily McCarthy's best novel, and even though Stella Maris is technically a novel, it's basically just a dialogue. It's two characters talking back and forth. I don't think there's a single word in this book that is not dialogue between the two characters. Yeah, like they're just special to me. Like I think these are genuine certified bangers. It's just a matter of where on the certified bangers they're going to go. These really hit for me hard. They're certainly favorites of mine. I'm going to put them above Frankenstein. I'm going to put them below Les Mis. Les Mis is still one of my like 2 or 3 favorite books. Like Passenger and Stella Maris aren't quite there. But they are really impactful. They did really impact me a lot. I really like them. I think they're very special, like I said. But yeah, so they're certified bangers. Like, they are Cormac McCarthy's magnum opus in my mind, so that is where they're going to go. Which leads us into No Country for Old Men, which maybe I should have technically talked about earlier, because the reason this is so late on the list is because I reread it at the very end of my McCarthy journey, when it was the first time, the second McCarthy that I ever read. Even though when I first read it the first time, I was like, I think this might be 5 stars, so I rated it 5 stars and said I reserve the right to bring this down to 4 out of 5 if I want to. And then with my sort of nitpicky ideas, I decided, yeah, this is just going to be 4 out of 5 stars instead. I'm going to be very picky because I don't think McCarthy, with the way he writes, deserves to have 5 out of 5 stars. Again, being very petty. But that's okay. When I reread it, however, I realized again that, like, no, this is just straight up 5 out of 5 stars. As one of the best villains ever, had like one of the most heart-wrenching and gut-punching twists I've ever read in a book, where like moments before a certain reveal happens, I was like, oh no, I suddenly get what's going on here. Don't tell me that's the case. And it was the case, and I was blown away. I was like, there's no way he just did that. And in fact, he did just do that, and it hurt me, and it hurt me a lot. But I think I'm going to put this at the top of 4 out of 5 star masterpieces, because, man, because if it's not 4 out of 5 star masterpieces, it's a certified banger. But something about it just doesn't really fit in the certified banger spot for me. Like, if I was going to put The Crossing on the tier list, I would also put this in 4 out of 5 star masterpiece, because in general, McCarthy is a 4 out of 5 star masterpiece type of author. He has plenty of stinkers, a handful of books that I just do not like and that I don't think are very good, for one reason or another, or some that are just forgettable, or maybe not quite as good as they should be considering the subject matter, whatever the case may be. No Country for Old Men is one that is very good, but like, something about it doesn't cross the gap in between being a 4 out of 5 star masterpiece and being a certified banger. This is the reason I had 4 out of 5 star masterpiece originally here, one tier above, is because like the 4 out of 5 star masterpieces are books that would otherwise be certified bangers if not for something that's massively holding them back. While I don't think No Country for Old Men has anything that's massively holding it back, there is something about it that in my mind just doesn't fit with the certified bangers, like The Passenger and Stella Maris does, even though I really like it, and putting it in non-banger favorites feels wrong because it is a banger. But like, I don't know, man. Like, that's just where I'm gonna put it. I don't really know why. I can't really explain why, but like, yeah, that is where I'm gonna put it. Now we come up to the final few books on the list, and I know that this video is a long one. I apologize for that, but we're just gonna power on through for a little bit longer here while we talk about the last few of these options. The Failures by Benjamin Lyer is a recent release. It came out in July 2nd of 2024. One that I read immediately upon release, and one that just super duper clicked for me. I loved this book, like everything about it. It might be my book of the year for 2024, is how much I enjoyed it. Just to keep this simple and sweet, I'm going to put this on certified bangers, and it's going to be pretty high up there as well. Um, it's hard to say exactly where I would put it, but like it's somewhere in here. I'm going to put it below Sun Eater because it's not quite Sun Eater levels of cool to me, but it is definitely one of my favorites. I think it is worthy of being considered a certified banger, if only for the way that Liar manages to play with time, timelines, and interconnected story plots, and reveals that come through all of that stuff. I can't really explain anymore without either spoiling it or just going into details. If you want to know more, try watching my spoiler-free review of it, but my review of the book, my discussion with Ben Lyer, maybe briefly touches on this as well, but like something about the Failures and the way that it manages to play with time and play with reveals that are still surprising yet so interesting to follow is just up there. It is top tier type of stuff. Like that was really like the thing that I enjoyed so much, and like the world building of it is really great. I'm gonna put it in certified bangers because I think it deserves to be there for the expertise with which reveals and stuff like that happen throughout the entirety of the book. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it anymore. That's just where I'm going to put it, and I'm not going to try to explain it anymore because that'll waste more time. It goes in certified bangers, so there you go. Valor by John Gwynne is a very big surprise to have on the list to any notable degree, because I did not like Malice when I read that back in 2023, like middle of 2023. Like 13 months later or something like that, I finally circled back and read Valor, and it was incredible. The pacing and literally everything about it was better than Malice for me. And I plowed through it. I read this entire book, nearly 700 pages, like 650 pages in one single week, and that was with 3 days of that week. And that was with like 2 or 3 days of that week where I just could not read at all, which means that I only spent like 5 or so days actually reading the book and finished it, which is a very impossible pace for me, generally speaking, even with fast-paced books like Valor. But this book was really great. The reasons why I gush about for 20 minutes in a review of this that I did in November, so check that out if you're interested on knowing more. I'm going to put this in non-banger favorites, I guess, yeah, and I'll put it, I'll put it below Count of Monte Cristo, but I'll put it above The Shining. Valor is a book that I really, really, really loved a lot. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a certified banger, like a absolute masterpiece of a book, but one that I just really clicked right, hit at the right time, just really enjoyed in its own way, and is a favorite of mine for the year in as a whole. Even though like I wouldn't say it's anything like so special to be a certified banger. Unlike Canonical for Leibowitz, which should be in certified bangers, but because I did not like part 3 very much, I'm going to put in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces. I'm going to put this one, let's go ahead and put it below Night of the Mannequins, but above At Night All Blood is Black. And the reason for this is because the first 2 parts of A Canonical for Leibowitz are insanely good. The picture that they draw, the tone and the world building of them is so good, but most importantly, the thematic threads through them that intersect and connect with the narrative, but also the implicit narrative and thematic drive that goes along in the book is fantastic. But there are aspects of part 3 that just really did not click for me. If part 3 was on par with the first 2 parts, this would be one of my favorite books of all time easily, but part 3 just didn't click. One that I might reread at some point in the future to see if I appreciate a little bit more. But because of part 3 ends up only being a 4 out of 5 for me, and because of some of the thematic ideas of it, like, is pretty hard to recommend to people broadly speaking, at least in this day and age. So it's gonna go in 4 out of 5 star masterpiece. I'm gonna go ahead and look at this now and see if there's any reordering that I want to do on this. I'll go ahead and put No Country for Old Men probably below a couple of these. Let's put it like there. That feels a little bit more appropriate to me. Even though, like I said, like these two books, No Country for Old Men and 20,000 Leagues, I rated 5 out of 5 stars, but they're at the bottom of 4 out of 5 masterpieces, maybe because, like, I don't know, they shouldn't be in 4 out of 5 star masterpieces. They should be somewhere else, but I don't know where else to put them. I'm going to go ahead and move Wrath of Darth Maul up a spot, because that one's pretty special to me. I'm going to move The Dark Tower down a couple spots. That seems pretty appropriate to me, some of those. You know what, at the end of this video, I'm actually going to go ahead and actually put Count of Monte Cristo 1 certified bangers, because it is one. Like, it's mostly just me being, like, very nitpicky that's causing me to say it's not a banger, but it is a banger. And the fact that the first 300 pages is, like, perfect, it deserves to be up here at a banger. I'm gonna go ahead and put Return to Adan above The Hobbit. Man, Les Miserables should be a little bit higher as well. I'm gonna put that up here. And that maybe, yeah, that looks right. Before I spend another 15 minutes here just reordering the list, now that I'm at the end and I've had a chance to reorder some of my placements in relativity with each other, this I think is basically my list, my Goodreads favorites shelf, essentially. So there's a few items that may or may not end up being on here at some point. I think The Crossing, East of Eden, and Infinite Jest at the very least will probably end up on this list at some point, most likely anyway. So I'll go ahead and reflect that by ranking them in here. Good grief, there we go. Infinite Jest there. I think Long Walk is easily the least likely to have that happen. These next 4 might come off the list at some point, not entirely sure. There's a possibility of it happening. In fact, I think Tales of Sun Eater Volume 3 will probably come off. Not sure about these other 3, still have to determine that. These are books that I really enjoyed, but I'm not going to explain anymore, but like, this is the order. This is the order. I'm done. I'm going to stop recording now. I've been recording this video for over an hour. I hope it's not much longer than 50 minutes. I apologize for the length of this video. I didn't think it was going to be this long, but I kind of knew it was going to be this long. But that's okay. Thank you for watching if you did. If you have a lot to say about this, if you want to argue about my ranking, I'm sorry. I forgive you and I apologize as well. But this is where I'm going to keep it. If you have grievances with my list, definitely let me know in the comments. If there's books that you know that I've read that you think should probably be on this list somewhere, give those a shout, and I'll maybe be able to explain why they aren't on my favorites shelf for one reason or another. But with that being said, like I said, I'm going to disappear now. I'm going to stop rambling. I'll be back in the next video on Sunday, the Crying of Lot 49 review, which I really recommend you check out. Thank you once again for watching. I'll be back in the next video, and I hope to see you there.